Instead of being reactive, being more proactive with response. When we start thinking about knowing what's happening with a vehicle, talk about incident severity prediction, that information is helpful beyond just the field responders. That's helpful for the ER doctor. That's helpful for the trauma care center. And when you start to be able to raise that, hey, here is an accident that at the time of accident indicates it's of this severe of nature, you can share that now to your medical side, not just the ambulance driver, but all the way to the hospital. They can start at 2:00 in the morning saying, hey, we need to get people in. And they're not calling them as the ambulance is pulling up and they're finding out they have a patient. They're actually starting to deploy and get resources on site at the time the incident starts. We're saving seconds, we're saving minutes, and we're saving lives by doing that. So I think prediction and sharing that information across the ecosystem is just going to continue to accelerate and improve responses.
Welcome back, everybody, to Safety Gap Podcast. Karen and I are extremely excited to be sitting here today with Amy Marion. Amy, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
We're very much looking forward to this. So, work at RapidSOS, Director of Public Safety for Enterprise Solutions. Would love to start with, how did you end up at RapidSOS?
Ooh, how did I end up at RapidSOS? That's a good question. So I have done a couple different things in the 911 space. I was in operations. I worked in admin for a while, and I kind of started in a role that was all things technical. And when I moved into that role, I also inherited an opportunity to work with our conference. And I did our vendor event for many, many years. And so I started working with all these different cool companies that are in the public safety space. And I recognized that there's a whole lot more to do in 911 than just work in 911, right? And so I worked in government. My husband worked in government, and it becomes a lot. So I knew I didn't want to do it forever. So I had a timeline and I had a goal, and I knew I wanted a number of years behind my belt before I made that move. And about a year before I made that move, this company, I started kind of interacting with at conferences and watching and like, they're talking about some cool stuff, but like we're doing this over here and like they're going to, kind of be here and then they're going to be gone. And then I remember hearing Michael at a conference in 2017 talking about what they were going to do with Apple, with Uber, with things like that. And I'm like, okay, sounds really cool, but like that's like next generation 911. Like we're doing that, right? We're working towards that. Fast forward another year, and suddenly RapidSOS was solving a problem that nobody else had been solving, and it really got my attention. And it was also around that same time frame where I was ready to make that next step. So I wasn't in a position where I had to leave, but I had the opportunity to kind of be selective and wait for the right opportunity to come along. I did not get hired at RapidSOS the first time around. Karen knows that story well, but
Karen.
I know.
I continued trying, and I waited for that right opportunity, and I continued relationships and, watching what they were doing, also implemented that as an early adopter in my own agencies. And so in 2019, I had the opportunity to make the move to the private sector, took a role at RapidSOS, and I have been here ever since.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm glad you stuck with it.
Yeah, a note for a lot of folks that, they always say, I want to work for RapidSOS. And there's sometimes, it's in the timing. The timing has to be right. And yes, you can blame me for the first attempt to work here.
No blame. It was, I had some open things in my existing role that I really needed to complete. And I had some projects that I was able to get under my belt and get behind me. So timing worked out the way it was supposed to, even if it wasn't what I wanted, but that's kind of how life is sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So how, obviously we have a lot of folks who come from public safety into RapidSOS, and this is, it's just not us. This is kind of a career path for some out there. I'd love to hear your views of just like, how was that transition? Like, what do people need to keep in mind as they may be thinking about making the jump from the public sector to the private sector?
Yeah, I have this conversation a lot one-on-one with folks who are kind of looking at what that next phase is. I want to do something different, but I'm a little scared. I don't know what I want to do. Again, I was in a position I could be selective. I had a very, very small subset of companies that I would even consider. And finding a role that's going to meet your skill sets. I think one thing we do in public safety in general, but especially 911, is we kind of, limit our skills and our abilities. Well, I was just a call taker. I was just a dispatcher. I worked in 911. How does that transition from the public safety skill set into the private sector? And actually, really, really well. You just kind of have to reframe the skills that you have to how they fit into a business or an enterprise environment. But when you make that move, You might want to, you might have looked forward for it for years. And when you make that move, suddenly you're uncomfortable. You're in the unknown. And there's a lot of learning. And so even after I made that transition, in spite of wanting to do it so bad and leave government behind me, I had moments of like, what did I get myself into?
Still or then?
Well, still moments of what did I get myself into, but I don't want to go back. But that it's uncomfortable and that transition is scary. And there were times that I wanted to jump back into what was comfortable. So I tell people when they're making that change, the first 2 to 6 months, I could give it 6 months before you're really going to be comfortable in any way, shape, or form. Not completely comfortable, but really comfortable feeling like you're contributing. You can own something. And then I started like right before the holidays, right before Thanksgiving. So you have Thanksgiving and Christmas. We lost somebody in our family. And so like I had a lot, and I felt for like the first 2 months, I'm like, I'm getting a paycheck and I don't feel like I'm doing anything to really actually help. But going into 3 months, 4 months, I started, picking up things and finding my space and finding how I could contribute in both to 911 centers, to the company, to our team. And it's been a ride ever since.
What do you think the biggest like 1 or 2 transitions were going from as you're getting comfortable? Like what was a maybe surprising or just something you didn't expect? Would be like as difficult as maybe it was?
The business side, the enterprise side is much different than government. Government moves at a much different pace, a different set of rules. And so moving into something that can be changing and driving forward, whether that's technology, whether that's partnerships, whether that's the structure of the company, like just you can change so quickly and scale. That was a mindset shift. And then I think the other thing that I had to unlearn was structure. We come from an environment that's more command structure, this hierarchy, and you have to go through A to get to B to get to C. And so having kind of this flat playing field and being able to go have a conversation with the CEO or a Slack message with the CEO or anybody in leadership and really having an equal voice at the table almost to be able to contribute was something you had to become comfortable with.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest things I've noticed is just, public safety, as to your point, is such a structured environment, and we're pretty much the opposite of that. One could argue there's no structure. So now today you sit at what I would consider this fascinating intersection between public safety and then like private enterprise. Maybe describe a little bit of like how did that role evolve? Like where did it start, and then kind of how's it evolved to where it is today? And obviously it's still evolving, but
Yeah. So, our early partnerships were all public safety integrations, like, delivering data into public safety integrations, which of course we still do today. And then as we started to grow and scale, we started bringing on other types of partnerships. And a lot of those partnerships were companies that can contribute to public safety in the ecosystem, but really needed that pathway into public safety. And not quite our B2B enterprise focus that we have today, but there was a huge public safety touch that was needed because, maybe they're providing towing services or mapping services or various types of things that can be used in 911. And so they were engaging with folks who were more enterprise minded and maybe didn't speak the same language or have the public safety understanding to help them be guided in the way that they needed to engage with 911. So I kind of came in to partner with like that team, customer success, sales, folks like that, to help them speak that language and support some of those relationships and help them engage more effectively, both internally and then with the ECCs. And then as we've continued to evolve and bring on more enterprise customers, we have all of these fascinating companies out there who have technology who can serve public safety, 911 and out to the field, but they have no clue about public safety. And so there's an understanding and context and education piece that goes with bringing them on and helping them understand, yeah, your technology is really great, but here's how it needs to interact with the public safety ecosystem. And here's how it's valuable to them. So it's just kind of evolved and grown over time to, encompass more and more.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's been times as well that, a startup company may have a bright idea of how they want to solve a problem for an emergency for a citizen or whatever. And you've kind of had to come in and say, great idea. Let me explain how this works. And so sometimes it's also fine tuning what they thought the great idea was into something that really would truly create value for public safety and for that consumer that might experience an emergency.
Yeah, and adding on to that, with this age of AI, a lot of technology companies are leveraging AI for really valuable things. But in the public safety space, especially, some of it's trust, some of it's regulation, local ordinances. There's a whole lot of dynamics that impact it. But there's really an important human component to the AI that we have to make sure that we're considering. So, helping them understand that, yes, AI can do so much, but we can't exclusively, at this point in time, it's not to say that we won't get there, but we can't exclusively rely on AI today for a public safety response. There's a human element that needs to be involved somewhere along that data transfer to help verify.
So you've been at this for a few years. You've seen, I was quite an evolution. What do you think the, top few things are that businesses, enterprises need to kind of keep in mind when they're approaching public safety, 911, RapidSOS in terms of working to get their technology and data into public safety?
I think a lot of companies, and there's so many different types, so I'm going to keep it very general because depending on what you're talking about, it could go very different ways. But we think about understanding how our technology impacts field responders often. We often don't think about how technology intersects with or interacts with 911. We forget about that piece of it. So I would really challenge any technology provider, whether they're already providing services or thinking about providing services to public safety, don't leave 911 out of it. Even if it's information that can go to field responders, 911 has to know what's happening with their field responders. They have a responsibility not just to answer the 911 call, but they're also responsible for those folks in the field. And if they don't know the information that they're getting and how they're making decisions on where they're at, where they're going, what they're responding to, 911 doesn't have the view that they need. So bringing 911 into the conversation, understanding what they do, and I think bringing them into the conversation is another important point. So a lot of times, technology is being sold, whether that's in a school, in a government building, in a corporation, in an enterprise environment. And the company is saying, here's what your technology can do, and it's going to connect into the ECC or into 911, and this is what's going to happen. And they're selling expectation on 911 without ever talking to 911. So bringing those folks that you're putting that responsibility on into the conversation to understand their environment, their workflow, their limitations. And at the end of the day, your technology, as valuable as it is, as important as it is, and safety it's going to bring, is not the only thing that they're being asked to do. It's not their only responsibility. And there's all these other things that one little piece of information works within that ecosystem.
Yeah, so there's a few things here. If I think about what you said, one is a lot of times people who have something they want to bring into public safety often think of the first responder, the field responder first, not knowing and understanding that usually the conduit to getting that data and information to them is 911. And then two, I think the second point I heard you mention, which is quite startling, is out there making promises about how this is connecting into 911 or public safety without actually ever talking to 911 or public safety.
Yeah.
And I think safe to say you see this all the time.
I do.
And the results that it'll yield because their magical system is going into the space. And, people out there view that officer that's coming, the fire truck that's coming, and when Amy says they don't understand what happens in the middle, that also happens in scenario trainings as well. You'll go to a tabletop exercise with a technology company that's working with different stakeholders that include the field responders, maybe it's a school district and others, and you kind of look around the table and you're like, wow, there's a really big component that's missing. How did you all get here? Oh, well, dispatch sent us. Okay, well, how did they get that information? And you start digging in a little bit deeper, and then there's this aha moment. So when we talk to these B2B companies as well, I think we're also talking to that audience of, police, fire, and EMS. Whenever we're doing these trainings, you have to think of that communications piece as a partner and bringing that voice to the table to make sure that we're thinking through all of those workflows. And if we're trying to cut down response times because this button is going to be sending the right data into public safety, how do we make sure that we're on the same page here and that all of that data is flowing responsibly and accurately out to the field person, ensuring that it's all encapsulated? Because we were talking to somebody else earlier. You also have to think through, okay, emergency happens. We have to go to prosecution. I need all of that data and information to show how the incident occurred, unfolded, and got out to this responder, and then the evidence that's captured from there as well.
I'm going to add one more consideration. If you're selling as a technology company, you're selling to a school district, or you're selling to an enterprise company, they might have a footprint across a large jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction might be covered by different 911 centers. I hear often, we're going to connect you to the closest 911 center. With technology, the closest location, the closest police department, it might be just down the block from you, but that could be in a different jurisdiction. And your responding agency, their physical headquarters, could be 2 miles down the road. That doesn't matter. What matters is getting the right people to the right place at the right time. And the professionals know how to do that. So where that physical building or that physical 911 center is located doesn't matter. But if you sell a technology to a school district and they have 30 different schools across multiple communities, we're sitting in the suburbs right now, jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction. A school district might have facilities in 10 different towns. Those 10 different towns could be serviced by 5 different 911 centers. And so making sure that you're looping in not just one decision maker, but the locations that are going to be impacted, because each one of those 911 centers might operate with different policies and procedures. And they need to have buy-in and a voice as these decisions are being made.
It would almost be safe to say that in that scenario, those 5 911 centers will be 100% different from each other.
That would be fair to say.
Policies, technology, everything.
That would be fair to say, yes.
There's another point you mentioned. I thought I've had these conversations as well, and that is, oftentimes you're an enterprise or a business, and the most important thing for you is the thing that you do, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But that's not the most important thing to 911. To your point, you made that is like that is one piece of data for a larger incident or emergency response. And so understanding kind of the importance or nice to have of what you're providing versus the must-haves for emergency response, or that your data might be critical for one type of incident, but not every incident. And just understanding kind of the place that your information sits in the kind of hierarchy of incidents and response. I don't know if there's anything you want to say to that, but
yeah, I think an easy example for that is medical information. If I have my medical information filled out on my phone and I call 911, and maybe I have a very rich medical history and it's important. If I'm calling 911 and I'm having a medical emergency and I'm having trouble breathing or, just can't relay what's happening, they now have my location. They have specific information about me that I have chosen to share, and they can help make an informed response about how to send an ambulance or where to send it to in that moment. But if I'm calling because somebody's fighting across the street, my medical information might be available, but they don't care about it. And they're not going to go, they take so many 911 calls in a day. They see so much information, have access to so much information. They don't care about my medical information if they don't need it. They only care about it when it's necessary. And then you multiply that times any other type of technology. Is that information valuable at that moment in time? And then there's always going to be that verbal call if somebody's calling 911. That human element is also important. Can they give me the information that I need to get? And if they can, I might rely less on the data, or I might use it as a verification piece, or it might supplement what they're telling me, but I might not rely exclusively on data. So I think there's a misconception that if we connect to 911 and tell them, well, the data's here, they don't need to ask me any questions. And we're not at that point in 911 yet.
There's a lot that are still policy driven, which is why we're asking for the address. Even though we have it, there's a verification and validation that needs to occur. But it's interesting kind of going back to, we've been talking about Next Gen 911 for like 30 years now, I think, or 28 at least that I've been, in the space. And We knew that it was going to be the superhighway of, information and video and all this other stuff. And we would say data. But I don't think in those years I ever remember defining what that data would look like. And, I don't know if you recall, but now there is actionable data. For the partners that are wanting to send information in, some of the things that they really need to think through is, number one, is it accurate information? Is it actionable information that can be used in real-time decision making? And I think medical health profiles is a really great example, but other contextual information could be things from like a panic button or an application that's on a person and they are not able to pick up the phone and dial 911 because it puts them in an unsafe situation. But if it says, here's the kind of car they're in, here's who that is more actionable and timely information that the field responders can look for that car. They can find that person, verify that's who it is. So I think data is really valuable, critical, and it's been fun to kind of help define what that additional data looks like.
To your point, we talked about NG 911 for a long time. And they talked about data, but they never defined it. But what we talked about is going to provide text, video, multimedia.
Yep.
And that's kind of like where it stopped getting any detail.
Yes.
And next generation 911 is so much more than that. There's all of this connectivity out there. There's IoT. Sensors are just exploding. Every single sensor does not need to go to public safety, does not need to go to 911. There's a lot of it that carries valuable information that can be life-saving, life impacting, or response impacting. And so making sure those right sensors are connected, and I'm going to risk saying something that maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't think that what we have envisioned and talked about as next generation 911 for 20-something years and is defined on paper is what next generation 911 looks like. I think it's a component of it. It's going to be really important for that voice call, that text, some data that will traverse that network. But I think the explosion of connectivity is going to demand an alternative, redundant type of platform to deliver the capabilities. And if we say, well, we've got to wait until it can go in this very narrow, defined on paper standard, and everything has to connect through that, we will never provide the service that we should be to our communities.
I think our consumer expectations are changing rapidly as they become a little bit more familiar with what happens in emergency services. And that consumer expectation is that we do have these amazing tools. In some cases, people do. Some people have incredible tools. You walk into their room and it looks so high tech and what you might see on TV, those are the haves. But we're still in a world of the have-nots. And so how do we start to equalize what people have access to so that there is all of that information can be surfaced, whether you're in a big city, whether you're in the suburbs, or if you're in a rural community and somebody, the only way that they're able to access emergency services is through a button, a panic button, a device that is not a 911 phone call. And I think that's the challenge that we all face in emergency services today.
I live in an urban area surrounded by rural community. And I often see and I often think about, you have folks out this time of year, they are harvesting corn, they are harvesting other crops, and they're out there by themselves. They're in a combine. If somebody has a medical emergency, if somebody has an industrial accident and they are alone, if there's technology that can connect, if there's video that can be accessed, if there's a button I can push to get help rather than waiting hours till somebody finds me and it's too late, like, there is stuff we can do for all of our communities. Doesn't have to be the haves and the has not. There's so much out there that can help different people.
Let's pick up on that. And you mentioned something earlier. Maybe define, how does this type of data get into 911? There's a variety of different ways and formats. And you kind of alluded to it earlier. It'd be great if you could kind of walk us through, like, what are the primary ways or options that exist today?
So I think it's really important to define 911 as we talk about that. So we say, how does it get into 911? There's 911, the number, and calling 911. And then there's 911, the place, or the Emergency Communications Center, ECC, that we talk about. And we kind of consider that 911 the place that's going to get us help regardless of how it connects. So there are certain types of emergencies that really just need to go to a 911 line with a voice call, right? There's a weapon detected. There's a school emergency. There's a medical emergency. And then there are some things that maybe don't raise to that level of emergency, or because of regulations, it doesn't go to 911. It needs to go to a 10-digit number, but it's reaching the 911 center, the Emergency Communication Center. via somebody calling on somebody else's behalf. I'm a lone worker. I push a panic button. I can't necessarily get to a phone. Maybe I don't have a phone on me, but that's going to a safety agent who can say, hey, I see that this is a lone worker. I see where they're at. I see who they're at. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call this number to reach the emergency communications center and give them the information I have about this person and let them know they have some type of emergency. Maybe they can text them. Maybe they can get more contextual information. Maybe they can't. But there's a pathway for that person who otherwise wouldn't be able to reach emergency services to get there. And then we're moving into a world where there's just data connectivity. As a 911 center, I can say, hey, we know that this data is reaching us. We know that it's coming into us, and we want to reduce phone calls so that data can come right into the ECC. It becomes a call for service. It's actionable almost at the moment that it's initiated. And now we're saving time. We're helping with staffing. We're helping response time improve. And it all goes together. Now, we're kind of in a transition to get to that point more effectively, but that's the path we're on. And some people are doing it today.
All right, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to say a phrase, and I want to hear kind of your reaction and thoughts around this. All right, so the first one is school safety. Where do we sit today? And where do we need to aspire to get to?
School safety takes a lot of different flavors. There are a lot of really great intended decision makers who have passed laws or legislation or recommendations around school safety. But sometimes what gets passed in language does not necessarily meet the intended spirit of the law, so to speak. And so what happens when that takes place is you have technology providers out there trying to sell their solution, understandably. Is it the right solution? Is it the best solution? I don't know. Not everything's a one size fits all. But when you're trying to conform to a legislation that maybe has language that doesn't actually meet the spirit of the law, you're short servicing your schools, your communities, and at the end of the day, your children. And so that is a frustrating thing that I sometimes see is like, we have to meet these requirements, but those requirements might not actually be the best requirements. And so again, it's bringing in stakeholders, the ones that we should be considering when we have these conversations and make these decisions. And I don't think it's with ill intent that these things happen. We're just not always listening to the whole ecosystem of voices to provide the right input.
How about an example? Like what legislation?
So we hear a lot about Alyssa's Law, for example, silent panic buttons. Many states have Alyssa's Law passed. Many states have silent panic buttons passed. It might not be called that, or they've just proactively implemented it. But in many states, that requirement takes on different specifics. And so there's not a Alyssa's Law, so to speak, that every state's alike. And when you have language that says a panic button has to connect to law enforcement or connect to emergency services, okay, well, where does it go? Does it go to law enforcement? What if it's a medical emergency? And so making sure that there's clarity in the pathway that information needs to take, making sure that solutions that are going to be implemented have the ability to indicate the best possible information. If you just tell me that there's an emergency at this school and we treat it as an active shooter situation, but in fact it was a medical emergency, we've sent the wrong folks. We've sent resources. We've put citizens in danger because of the escalated response that has been initiated. And so there's all of these components that have to be considered to make sure the right information is being surfaced, the right response is being sent, and we're not putting people in danger just for the sake of a response.
Words matter. And so in some of those legislation language, it will say like may or shall, and then there's some unfunded mandates as well. And I've been talking to some folks in different state roles or regional roles that talk about it's, fun to have an unfunded mandate. Now, the mandate, the spirit of it is great because we want to protect our children when these things happen. And unfortunately, you can't pick the community it's going to happen in because it isn't anywhere at any potential time. This unfortunately could happen. So we have to be prepared for it. But you're right. And how do we identify all of the stakeholders to bring this technology in responsibly where it is going to make a positive impact on the outcome of these emergencies? And you're right, the various emergencies as well. We've got probably a lot more medical situations that happen in a school. And when that occurs in several places that have like standard response protocols, things like that, there's something that is mentally happening with our kids in those spaces as well, and how they're reacting. So if they know, the sound, the sight, the name is for a medical situation, we're securing the building because, somebody's got to be transported, it's for privacy. Maybe I can go back to learning in that psychologically safe environment. So I also think about the impact that it's having, unfortunately, negatively on our kids that are in schools these days.
So with that, you spend a lot of time talking to communities, schools, vendors, public safety. If a school superintendent asks you, what are kind of the best practices for school safety? Like what do you tell them? Certain technologies or like a certain path to think about it? Or
I think it depends on what they're trying to solve for. Panic buttons are good. They have benefit. They are not a replacement for this is the only way we're going to connect to emergency services. So I think one misconception is that we're putting panic buttons in, so we don't need to call 911. No, actually, there's a value in having a human call and give whatever contextual information, if they can, if they have a device, if it's safe to do so. And we recognize that there are times that it's not. So the panic button is insurance of sorts to say, hey, I have this technology to reach a response. If I can't do it in a different way, that might be better. That's one thing. Then when I think about this panic button is a very reactive solution. How can we be proactive? So we think about things like weapons detection. If I can put technology on my cameras outside of a building or at entrances to a building or in hallways and identify that somebody has a weapon in that building before there's a need for a panic button or before anybody knows that that person has entered the premises or the outside perimeter, now I've actually saved the need for the panic button. So it's not just one level of what's important. What are your priorities? What is the requirement you have in your state or your jurisdiction that has been mandated to you? But then how do you use your dollars most effectively to think about prevention and not reaction to?
And I would add, always talk to your local public safety leaders.
Yes. If that got cut from the earlier part of the discussion, yes, always talk to your 911, your law enforcement, your fire. This is an entire ecosystem. They need to be a part of that conversation.
All right. Next one. Telematics or crash detection?
I think crash detection is the most common and thought of, but telematics provides so much more than that. So I think we're moving into a space where the true potential of telematics is going to be seen and grown.
Well, you can't leave us with that cliffhanger.
Yeah. Tell
Say
me
more.
Well, I started in the late 90s answering 911 calls. And one of the first videos I ever watched was a telematics provider and how they are going to connect to 911 and give me information.
Was that on the DVD that was sent to your... I remember that one.
Yes, it might have been even on VHS, I think, at the time still. I remember putting it in the break room video player. But we've been receiving this for a really long time by phone, by verbal relay. And so now that's actually reaching the 911 center and they're getting that information. Now, maybe when they're taking the call, when they're first getting it, they just need that location, description. Hey, I'm going to get my resources out. Anybody injured? How bad are they injured? Okay, you don't know. And now I can go back and I can see, okay, there were 4 people in the vehicle. 2 of them didn't have seatbelts on. Or there was a rollover. Or, oh, I have the VIN. Maybe I should go see if this was a stolen vehicle because it kind of matches the description we were looking for yesterday. And so I can actually prep my responders before they're even there. But now we start talking about stolen vehicles. What about connecting those pieces of information to 911? Hey, my vehicle was stolen this morning. Here's the information. If we can connect that car provider to say, hey, now we can see where the stolen vehicle is at. Okay, it's sitting. It's been sitting for 2 hours. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Might be pretty safe for the officers to go find that vehicle. Or it's moving. There might be a bad guy in it, So like all of these pieces of information come in and kind of help us with vehicles beyond just crash.
And I think too, from the crash detection piece of it, we see so many bad accidents and I feel like they're just happening so much more frequently. And in those cases, there is a delay in somebody being able to call 911 unless you're on a highway and like everybody's calling for you. But none of those people have all of the information that is needed to affect the response. And I'll give an example. My nephew was involved in a car accident and had a crash detection. It wasn't in the vehicle, but it was on his device. And that notified 911 immediately. And by the time he was able to actually get out of the vehicle after it spun around. He got hit a second time. They were like on scene as he was getting out of that car, airbags deployed and everything. He didn't even realize that that device had called on his behalf. And you think about the folks that are driving on rural roads. How do they know where they're at? Nobody's looking at mile markers anymore. And so the fact that these things can now call on your behalf and give accurate, timely information in the event that you're not able to speak for yourself has saved so many lives. I think we get these stories all the time of lives that were saved because of that crash detection in that car.
And when you talk about that, I always go back to one story that we've seen and we've heard of. I think it was in Northwest Indiana a year or two ago. And a gentleman was in a car accident just before Christmas. And his vehicle wasn't equipped with telematics, or at least it wasn't telematics that reached the 911 center. And he was there out of sight off of an interstate under kind of a bridgeway, roadway, or whatever for 6 days before somebody found him. And he lived. And, I think he had some physical injuries that were life impacting, but his life was saved. But what if he had been found 6 days earlier? And whether that was his car that could have told 911, something he was wearing, his watch, his phone, something, or something he had on him that would have allowed him to reach and say, oh, or talk to, I need to contact 911.
It's
6 days is a long time.
It's a long time. And that is life or death. I mean, we say seconds save lives. If we could have had that information in seconds, could other injuries have been prevented because that care gets on scene faster?
And many people wouldn't survive that time frame. And I mean, we know just minutes, like you said, save lives, not days, but minutes, seconds.
I mean, it's kind of by definition, you get in a crash. I mean, it's going to be hard to physically call a lot of times. Where is the industry on this? So obviously Karen, you gave a few examples of, now I get it on a device, my watch or my phone or whatever. It's also embedded in the car, and in the car you have enhanced data. Where, from your perspective, is the device industry versus car or automotive industry and kind of this journey of getting cars connected or devices connected in terms of telematics and crash?
I think a lot more telematics providers are thinking about how they connect into public safety as a whole, just generally speaking. There's a lot of work to be done. We want to standardize that, and we really should. But I also don't believe we can let the development of standards prohibit innovation today. And so there's this balance of making sure we're connecting the right information while continuing to improve standardizing that across the entire ecosystem of telematics providers. And then there's the device-based, which are valuable. Not everybody's going to have that car that has that connected technology. Not everybody's going to subscribe to that service. Our telematics provider is going to just start providing the service as something that comes with that vehicle versus making people pay for what could be life-saving information. I can't make those decisions for them, but I certainly would make a recommendation. But at the end of the day, once we continue to move into newer vehicles more and more on the roadway, that information coming from that vehicle is the most accurate, most reliable information. Now, that doesn't diminish a phone that can call, a wearable that can call, but when those are calling together, now we have verified information. We can kind of piece this, and we can start to use AI to say, hey, here is a device in a car that's telling you there's a crash detected, and here's a car that is in a crash, and oh, here's another car right by this that's in a crash. And you actually start having situational awareness and a picture of what has happened just from data.
And the user or recipient of that information doesn't sit in 911 and stay there solely, right? You've got some that are the answering point or a dispatching center, and that information could be critical to the accident investigator that is going to have to go on scene and get the little measuring thing and make all these magical calculations. That information may be right there for them. And perhaps it's used as a validation or verification piece because the math still has to be done. But, we're not the only consumer of that information. At different points in times, from an emergency indication throughout the call or request for service, all the way through dispatching on scene and the disposition of that, different pieces of information are going to be valuable in different moments. So I think one thing I want to make sure people hear is there is value in having that data. It may not always be in the first 15 seconds of that call. It may be a little bit later in. Some of those pieces may be critical in that first 15 seconds. And so making sure that you're working with the technology providers as well to say, hey, we've got the Amy's of the world that can sit with them and say, these are the pieces of information that you're able to send from that device. Here's what's going to be most important. And then organizing that in a way that the data is still important to somebody, just not right in the first 15 seconds of that call or 2 minutes or whatever.
I think what we're talking about here too, we've got to kind of back to the school safety, reactive versus proactive. What we're talking about is very reactive. And we think about our cars. I get a rental car when I go on a work trip, and it tells me when I need to pull over because I'm, not paying enough attention, or my eyes aren't on the road, or I need to pull over and get coffee. So our vehicle manufacturers are not just thinking about how can we get the crash detection information to public safety, which we do need to continue to improve and do, but how can we make our vehicles safer? How can we make our roadways safer? Ultimately, how can we make the people on the roads safer?
Yeah, this is a great point, because when you see your car starting to do that, or you see your device calling 911 for you, your expectation is going to be, well, the car can also call 911. I mean, so this idea of it's really interesting, this idea of like, do I as a consumer pay for safety, or safety expected in this day and age with the technology around us that you are investing in? You're paying money for a device, you're paying money for a car. It'll be interesting to see the sentiment of the consumer over time in terms of what the expectations are.
Yeah, I think vehicle safety is also really interesting when you think about how a lot of these cars are crowdsourcing information because of the sensors and cameras that they have on them as well. And how can we start to predict and prevent some of these incidents from occurring so that we're moving vehicles off the roadway, or, intelligently leveraging technology and AI to say, hey, you might want to exit here, potential crash up ahead, or we're seeing congestion happening. And then there's all of these really cool sensors that can go in the roadways and the lights and all of the things, piecing that together in one bundle of information to provide to public safety, I think is really going to make some cool impacts.
And one step beyond that, public safety being able to provide information back out to the vehicle. Like that it's great that we're crowdsourcing information. It's great that the people driving by are saying yes or no, or there's an accident, or there's a police officer or whatever. But when 911 or the ECC can say, hey, this is happening here, you need to go there, or you need to avoid this, or choose what kind of technology is receiving that push of information, because maybe it's only a subset that needs it, but they can say, hey, you're in this vicinity, this is what you need to know.
Or we know we're coming, stop calling.
All I know is my daughter's 14. She's about ready to drive. So I'm going to put all the telematics and crash detection I can around her. It's going to be painful.
Put her in a bubble.
Put her in a bubble.
Then put a drone over her wherever she goes.
Okay, let's pick one more. Do you have one? Do you have a favorite you want to talk about?
I'm going to say personal safety.
Okay. That's a very broad topic, personal safety. Okay, we have lone workers and we have gig drivers, which can be one and the same, but we are connected to nearly every gig driver of ride sharing out there in the space. And so there's a lot of opportunity to provide safety when we're talking about delivery, whether that's your groceries, whether that's your, food pickup. These people are out there trying to make a living, supplement their income, make an income, whatever the case may be. And they don't necessarily get to pick and choose where they're going. And so in certain cases, they can feel very uneasy. Maybe that's a certain area of a neighborhood they're going to. Maybe that's because there's unusual people around where they normally wouldn't be. Whatever the case may be, but they're going into these spaces that they might feel unsafe. And again, being proactive versus reactive, it's very easy to, well, if I'm going to go do this, but if something happens, I'll call 911. But we're actually giving them a pathway with our RapidSOS safety agents and kind of like in the middle solution between the consumers and between 911, because everything doesn't need to go to 911. I don't want somebody who's delivering to call 911 or even call the non-emergency line. Hey, I'm feeling uneasy. I just want somebody to talk to me.
Just stay on the phone.
Yeah. Some agencies might have the bandwidth to do that, and other agencies just don't. It's not that they don't want to help their citizens, but somebody might be calling 911 and I am the only other person available, and they might be having a medical emergency or, something life and death or something very urgent. I can't stay on the phone with you to sacrifice answering that 911 call. So we offer them that kind of interim solution. Hey, I'm going to connect to a safety agent. Maybe that's via text. Maybe that's via a voice call. Maybe it's, hey, I'm here. And the safety agent's going to check on me in 2 minutes. If I don't answer, now they can call 911. They can say, hey, I see where this person's at, and they haven't answered me. And they were concerned. So I need you to go check on them. And that can be canceled if everything's okay beforehand. but we're giving them a sense of safety, and people are looking for that in today's environment.
Yeah, when you, I remember mentioning his comment, when I hear the word lone worker and you get a description of what that is, and you start looking around, and it's amazing how many people work in that kind of lone worker environment where, similar to the combine driver, something happens to you and, this might be a while before anyone knows.
I work from home. I'm a lone worker. I work in a space that I feel very comfortable in, but there might be other people who work home and alone, and they don't live in a space that they feel that comfortable in. So they are also a lone worker. And how do they let somebody know when they need that help or assistance?
You think about business travelers as well. Like, yes, we're home, but we're also traveling,
Yeah.
and people don't always know where we are. And in the event of an emergency, we know that there's a system or something that if I can't pick up the phone and call, I can leverage and be able to connect with emergency services immediately. And I mean, thankfully, I think we know pretty much everybody across the country now, so we'll likely know them by name.
Yeah, it's true.
Everybody needs a Karen button.
No, this is what they don't need. I also learned recently, like there's a language from a transcription translation piece, but there's a language called Karen. I said, oh Lord, nobody needs that.
That was new to me when I heard it. Yeah.
Me too. I thought somebody was making fun of me for a moment, but it was spelled with an E.
But it wasn't you.
That wasn't you. All right, I have one more.
Okay.
We're spending a lot more time with chiefs of security and global security operations centers. So, think of big facilities, enterprises, retail, distribution centers, warehouses, et cetera. Kind of what's the nature of the opportunity there in those types of conversations in terms of like maybe linking them closer if they're not linked up as close as they could be with public safety?
Yeah. So I'm going to caveat this conversation with a lot of the folks in that space come from law enforcement. They've been decision makers. They've been law enforcement leaders. And I'm married to that side as well. So I come from 20 plus years of being married to law enforcement through various ranks all the way to the top, as well as my son being in law enforcement. So I have a passion for what we're doing in this space from multiple facets and hats. But I think when we think about that enterprise space, and again, it's bringing in the right stakeholders, but there are responders, there are people with knowledge, there are people, whether that's, law enforcement background, medical responders on sites. There are responders who are able to get to something that's on a facility or an enterprise space, but they don't always know till law enforcement ambulance is rolling up at their gates like, hey, we got a call here. And they actually could be providing services much quicker and more efficiently. And so connecting those dots of here's connected data, here's information, here's a 911 call on your facility, and bringing these all into this network effect and making sure the right information is getting the right place at the right time. We say that a lot, but that right information, right place, right time goes beyond just what we traditionally think of as field responders. It is. Here is an enterprise who is trained, who is prepared and equipped to respond. They also need a subset of information when those emergencies happen. And we are doing that today. That's another podcast.
No, and it's also just, the ability for them to better communicate.
Yeah.
Also, the first responders showing up to the first responders already on scene from the enterprise perspective, and making sure that communication is
coordinate and collaborate.
Yeah, and I would even take that information from the enterprise space, and it's valuable to the 911 center. So giving them that pathway of communication, sharing bidirectional data and information, whether that's a map of the grounds. And, just because they have responders on the scene doesn't mean your outside responders aren't still going to come in, but helping them know where to go. Who should I be looking for? Who's already there on scene? Maybe there's chemicals, maybe there's hazmat information. Here's the information that you as a 911 center needs to know to be able to share and relay to your responders so they have the best equipped information on their way into a scene.
I appreciate all those examples. I think that was very helpful. Any additional opportunities in kind of visioning the future? We've obviously talked about some of the art of the possible here. Anything else that gets you particularly excited as you endeavor to talk and kind of connect more enterprises with public safety?
Again, instead of being reactive, being more proactive with response. One conversation, we'll go back to telematics briefly, and I think we could use this example, whether in school safety situations or others, but go back to telematics. When we start thinking about knowing what's happening with a vehicle and seeing talk about incident severity prediction. We didn't really talk about this in this podcast, but that's something that's, definitely under discussion with, a lot of different providers. That information is helpful beyond just the field responders. That's helpful for the ER doctor. That's helpful for the trauma care center. And when you start to be able to raise that, hey, here is an accident that at the time of accident indicates it's of this severe of nature, and you can share that now to your medical side, not just the ambulance driver, but all the way to the hospital. They can start at 2:00 in the morning saying, hey, we need to get people in. And they're not calling them as the ambulance is pulling up and they're finding out they have a patient. They're actually starting to deploy and get resources on site at the time the incident starts. And so again, we're saving seconds, we're saving minutes, and we're saving lives by doing that. So I think, again, that's one example, but I think this more prediction and sharing that information across the ecosystem is just going to continue to accelerate and improve responses.
All right. So then the last one is all those enterprises out there or businesses who have cool technology and they want to learn more and get your wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best way to reach you?
You can reach out to me via email at Marion, Amarion, at rapidsos.com. And I would also encourage them to get into an ECC and visit one if they have not been to one, and we can help arrange that if they need to.
You're also available on LinkedIn. I'm just going to throw that out
yes.
there.
Amy Marion on LinkedIn. I am there.
I will be your PR.
Yes, thank you.
I'll echo that point. I think there's like life and safety before you went to an ECC, and there's life and safety after. Your perspective and safety, how you want to say that, after you've been to an ECC. It's super eye-opening and obviously makes you even more committed to doing what you can to keep us all safe. So thank you, Amy, for joining. This was wonderful. Learned a lot.
Thanks for having me.